How to play Cribbage, a basic playthrough for 2 players. In this video, I'm going to play through one round of Cribbage to show you how it's played. For this video, I will assume that you've played blackjack or poker before, so you're familiar with playing card terminology. Before I begin, note that you can change the speed of this video if you click on the gear icon on the bottom right corner of this YouTube video. I mentioned that in case this tutorial is too slow or too fast for you. Before we start, let's talk about the objective of Cribbage. Cribbage is a game that was invented about 400 years ago. The object of the game is to be the first to score 121 victory points. You earn points by playing the cards from your hand and the crib, which I will describe later. From the cards in your hand and the crib, you must play runs, flushes, card sums, and other ways. We keep track of scores using a cribbage board, which I will show you briefly at the end. In Cribbage, you can play up to 4 players, but in this tutorial, we will begin by going through a 2-player game. In Cribbage, face cards are worth a value of 10. Aces are worth a value of 1. Everything else is worth their numerical value. All suits are equal in the game of Cribbage. And before we play, we remove jokers from the deck. Scoring overview. There are 4 phases in the game of Cribbage. Each player will play their hands and score during phases 2 and 3 of each round. The dealer of each round will have another chance to score during phase 4. Finally, each player will take turns being the dealer. As I mentioned, each round is composed of 4 phases: the discard phase, the laying down cards phase, the counting hands phase, and finally, the counting the crib phase. Let me describe each phase briefly. The first phase. The discard phase is when each player will discard their cards that will go to the dealer's crib. The second phase. The laying down cards phase is when we will lay down cards to score points. The third phase is the counting phase. It's another phase that we will get a chance to score more points using the cards that were dealt. And the last phase is the counting crib phase. This is when only the dealer will score more points with the cards in their crib. For every round, each player will take turns being the dealer and having their own crib. Basically, phases 2, 3, and 4 are when players will get a chance to score points. Setup. Deciding who deals first. Let's say we have 2 players, Alice and Bob. First, we shuffle the deck and each player cuts the deck. Whoever cuts the lowest value card is the first dealer. Alice cuts first and gets an ace of hearts. Bob cuts next and gets a 3 of diamonds. Since Alice has the lowest number, she deals first. After the dealer is decided for the round, the dealer then shuffles and has the player to her right cut the deck. The starter card is a card that will be used for phases 3 and 4 of the game. At the beginning of each new round, a new starter card will be decided by the player to the dealer's left. All the players will get a chance to use the starter card during the scoring phase. Since Bob is the player to the dealer's left, he cuts the deck and the top card remaining will be the starter card. The starter card is also known as the cut card. In this case, Bob cuts the 5 of hearts. Bob then places the starter card next to the deck. The starter card is also known as the cut card. As I said earlier, the starter card will be used by both players to score points during phases 3 and 4. Now let's start our example round. We start with phase 1, the discard. The discard phase is when players decide which cards they want to keep and which cards they want to discard to the dealer's crib. The discard phase starts when Alice deals 6 cards to both Bob and herself. So, Alice deals 6 cards. Each player's hand is hidden to their opponents, but for demonstration purposes, I'm showing all the cards for both players. So these are the cards that Alice and Bob have been dealt. Alice has a 5 of spades, 4 of spades, 2 of spades, 8 of clubs, 6 of hearts, and 8 of diamonds. Bob has 10 of spades, 6 of diamonds, Jack of hearts, King of clubs, 7 of clubs, and 4 of hearts. Since this is a 2-player game, each player will discard 2 cards. Again, they will discard 2 cards into the crib face down during this phase. Alice decides to discard 8 of diamonds and the 8 of clubs face down. Bob then decides to discard his 10 of spades and his King of clubs face down. Now, these 4 discarded cards make up the crib and will be set aside. The ownership of the crib changes each round and will be owned by the dealer of that new round. The crib is a separate hand that can only be used by the dealer to score points during phase 4, the crib counting phase. The crib will not be revealed to anyone until later in phase 4. So the dealer sets aside the crib, but does not look at the contents of the crib. Alright, on to phase 2, laying down cards. Phase 2 is also called the play. The laying down phase is when the players will lay down their cards in the public space from their hand. And depending on what cards are laid down, they will score points. Bob is to the left of the dealer, so he will start laying down cards first. Bob lays down a Jack of hearts in front of him and says 10. Whenever a player plays a card from their hand, they must lay it in front of themselves, and that's the public space, and then they say the points that they earned by laying down that card. In this case, the very card that Bob played from his hand is a Jack, which has a value of 10 points. However, he does not earn any victory points yet. Alice then lays down a 5 of spades in front of her and says 15 for 2. Whenever a player lays down a card to create a cumulative sum of 15 or 31, they score victory points. In this case, the cumulative value of cards laid down in the public space, here represented by the green rectangle, is worth 15 points. 10 points from Bob's played Jack, and 5 points from the 5 of spades played by Alice. Please note that Alice gets 2 victory points from the sum of the card points. She does not score the actual card points themselves. Alright, play continues. Bob lays down 7 of clubs and says 22. Alice then lays down 6 of hearts and says 28 for 3. Alice scores the 3 victory points because she made a run. The run that Alice created was 5, 6, and 7. A run is composed of any suit with 3 or more consecutive numbers. In this case, Alice made a run with the 5 of spades, 6 of hearts, and 7 of clubs. It's Bob's turn now. Bob only has a 6 of diamonds and 4 of hearts in his hand, and if he played it, he'd go over the limit of 31. So, Bob cannot lay down a card. Bob says go. Bob cannot lay down because, again, the sum cannot be over 31, so that's why he said go. Alice lays down a 2 of spades and says 31 for 1. Alice scores 1 victory point because she was the first player to create a sum of 31 points from the public space cards. It's Bob's turn again. Earlier, Bob said go, then Alice finished her turn. Since Bob said go, and it's his turn again, he gets 1 victory point. After scoring, and since each player cannot lay down without busting, 31, each player takes the cards that they laid down and puts it in their own discard pile. The sum of cards is now reset to 0. Here we see that Alice and Bob have their own temporary discard piles. Play continues until all hands are empty. Bob lays down his card in the public space and announces 6. Alice lays down and says 10. Bob lays down and says 14 for 3. Bob scores 3 victory points because he's the last player to lay down a card, and he also makes a pair of 4s. Both players have laid down all their cards, so the laying down cards phase is done, and the next phase starts. Phase 3, counting hands. Phase 3 and 4 are also called the show. During the counting hands phase, each player will score by using the starter card and the cards that were in their temporary discard pile. Each player will score by playing cards in their hands, along with the starter card, to make combinations of pairs, runs, 15s, and 31s. We start with Bob, who is the left of the dealer. Notice that Bob took back all the cards he laid down and put them back into his hand. Also, here's the starter card we determined at the beginning of the round. Bob starts by scoring his hand by saying 15 for 2. He scores 2 victory points because he identified the jack in his hand and the starter card, which is 5 of hearts, which makes a sum of 15. Next, Bob scores again and says 15 for 2. He scores another 2 victory points because he identifies a sum of 15 composed of the 6 and the 4 in his hand, plus the starter card of 5. Bob is not finished scoring yet because he sees that he can identify a run with a 4, 5, 6, and a 7. So he says 4 for a run. And finally, Bob scores another 1 victory point because the jack in his hand has the same suit as the starter card. This is known as scoring 1 for his knob. So this is a special way to score. During the counting hands phase, Bob was able to score 9 victory points. That is, 2 plus 2 plus 4 plus 1 makes 9 victory points. Bob was able to score by identifying as many pairs, runs, sums, and knobs from his hand and the starter card. Since he could not identify any more combinations of cards from his hand, it's the next player's turn to count their hand. So now it's Alice's turn to count her hand. She starts with the cards in her temporary discard hand of the 5 of spades, 4 of spades, 2 of spades, and 6 of hearts. Like Bob, Alice will be able to use the starter card to score in this phase. Alice was able to find 2 different ways to make the sum of 15 to earn 4 victory points. And an interesting way she was able to score was by identifying a double run. A double run is a run with a pair in the middle. From the double run, she was able to score 8 points because she could score the run of 4, 5, 6 in 2 different ways. The first run is the 4 of spades, 5 of spades, and 6 of hearts. The second run is 4 of spades, 5 of hearts, and 6 of hearts. These 2 runs give her 3 victory points each, and the pair of 5s in the middle gives her 2 points, so 3 plus 3 plus 2 equals a score of 8 victory points from the double run. To finish our round, we will end with the 4th phase, counting the crib. In this phase, Only the dealer will score the cards that make up his or her crib. We will use the same scoring scheme of identifying pairs, runs, 15s, and 31s just like we did in the counting hands phase. The dealer for this round was Alice, so she starts the counting cribs phase. Alice was able to find 2 different ways to make the sum of 15 to earn 4 victory points. She was also able to make a pair for 2 victory points. And that's all she could find based on the cards in her hand. So her total score for the crib phase was 6 points. So that's the end of the round, and a new round starts with a new dealer and a new cut card, or a starter card. Play continues until someone reaches 121 victory points. I said earlier that I would talk about how to keep score using the cribbage board. Traditionally, players have used the cribbage board to keep track of the score. Keeping score is just a matter of moving up the pegs as each player scores. We have 2 pegs per player because 1 peg will always be used to keep track of the most recent score, and the back peg will move up as many as the player scores. In the example board shown, there are 3 tracks for a 3-player game, but you can play up to 4 players. Finally, here's a quick reference to all the ways to score during phases 2 through 4. For a more detailed list, please Google Rules of Cribbage and click on the Wikipedia page. I've also put this in the description of this video. Here's a scoring reference for phases 3 and 4. So that was Cribbage. I hope you find this video useful. Now go start playing Cribbage. Enjoy!